Walk around Kendall Square in Cambridge and you're surrounded by giants of biotech. Some of the world's biggest pharmaceutical companies are developing groundbreaking drugs right in our backyard, but developing treatments is just half the battle of making people well. Many new medications cost more than most people spend on their homes. Kara Miller, host of Innovation Hub on WGBH Radio, is here with more. Welcome, Kara. Well, are we at the point where these high-tech drugs are going to be more and more expensive because they treat such very specific diseases that are so limited?
No, that's exactly right. And if you look at some of the drugs that are on the market right now, some of those most expensive drugs, you know, you'll see we're talking drugs that are hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, right?
Wow.
I mean, $375,000 a year. You know, I mean, that's an incredible amount of money for something that you may have to take every year for the rest of your life. Now, if you take Kalydeco, which is right on there for certain people who have cystic fibrosis, and that was actually developed by a company in Boston, Vertex Pharmaceuticals. It's really quite an effective drug, and it took years and years of hard science. And so what you're seeing increasingly is two things. One is the science is really tough, so they're trying to make the money back by charging you more. But the other thing that's happening, too, is that these drugs are incredibly expensive because, you know, we can't negotiate. The U.S. is not able, like other countries, to negotiate drug prices.
Well, what can happen? Is there regulation? What can happen to reduce these?
Well, so other countries do negotiate. So almost every other industrialized country has a health service, like the National Health Service in Britain, that will buy drugs in bulk. And so they, in aggregate, you know, will buy these drugs. So they will say, we're not going to pay this amount of money. We want to pay less. And generally, they'll be negotiated with because they're willing to buy a lot. We actually have it written into our laws that we cannot do that. And I think there's a danger that this is actually going to spread to many more drugs. So if you talk to people who are interested in doing cancer research, they say, look, we're looking at cancer drugs that may be more and more and more specialized. So just one company may make the cancer drug that treats the specific kind of cancer that you have.
How do doctors feel about this? I mean, it's got to be mortifying to give a prescription to somebody and, oh, by the way, it's $275,000. Who's paying for that anyway? So
in large part, it's your HMO that's paying for it. But it does happen that sometimes doctors do push back. And there's one great example of this. There's two drugs. One is called Avastin, and one is called Zaltrap. And they both are for colorectal cancer. And you see, one Avastin's $5,000 a month, which is not cheap, but Zaltrap is more than twice as expensive. And it basically did no better. By some measures, it kept you alive for 6 more weeks. So one question is, you know, you think back a few years ago to the issue of drug panels, and I think we are going to, at some point, come to this reckoning point. Well, we're going to come to this reckoning point of how expensive should the extra 3 or 4 or 5 or 10 weeks of life be? You know, is that worth an additional $500,000 of drugs, right? And that's the kind of thing that doctors were dealing with. And doctors at Memorial Sloan Kettering, which is, of course, really important in dealing with cancer, said, look, we're not willing to pay this extra amount of money. We're not willing to do it.
Pharmaceutical companies themselves, are they invested in this? Do they want it to be that expensive? Or would they like to see it be cheaper because it would be more accessible and more people could take it?
I think pharmaceutical companies are pretty fine with the way things are. After all, they mostly pass the costs along. So you are the consumer of the drug, but you don't pay for the drug. You pass that cost along right to your HMO. So mostly they're pretty fine with it. And what you see, as I said, is you see America having to make up in large measure for what Japan and Australia and Britain and France don't pay. So every drug company knows they have to make up their costs in America in pricing the drugs here. So that's sort of one thing that's happening.
All right, Kara Miller, thanks for that information.